in 15 years, the cost of solar power went from $350 a megawatt hour to $35 a megawatt hour today. So that shows a 90% decrease in the cost of solar power. Now, obviously, a lot of that's been technology driven, but I also recognized early on that we have energy sources that are free, but we have high upfront costs. So it's also important to continue to drive financial innovation, bring more capital into the sector to fuel this decreasing levelized cost of energy to make it affordable as a competitive source of power across the U.S. and around the world, for that matter.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Humpton, CEO of Siemens USA, and thanks for listening to The Optimistic Outlook. In this podcast, we look at tough problems and try to find solutions, practical solutions for solving them. In particular, we tackle the big global megatrend that is climate change. And there's a perspective we hear repeatedly on this podcast. It's that the technologies we need are available in the marketplace. This is why we can be optimistic. The challenge is we need to accelerate our efforts. We need to find ways to scale the use of the technologies so that we move much, much faster. Okay, and that's why you'll find me focusing a lot on one question. That is, how do we modernize the power grid? We've been exploring this question since my earliest episodes, and I want us to continue looking deeper at this issue because the power grid has been called the greatest machine ever built. It's been called the great enabler of our economy and American innovation. But now we need our grid to enable, really to serve as the backbone of the energy transition and our response to climate change. And the reality is we need not only cleaner electricity, we need a lot more of it to power our future. Think about the AI boom that's fueling a data center explosion. Think about the massive investments now happening in clean energy manufacturing and the power that requires. And think about how a key to a sustainable future is electrifying American industry, infrastructure, and transportation. So we're going to be talking a lot about this on the podcast. As a primer, I shared some initial thoughts in a recent Optimistic Insights episode. You can look for the title Powering Up. But now let's get into this topic with today's guest, Susan Nickey. Susan is the Executive Vice President and Chief Client Officer for a climate-positive investment firm called HASI. She's also board chair of the American Clean Power Association. When Susan started her career in banking, few people saw a future in financing renewables. It wasn't even a sector yet. Well, Susan is now working to advance clean energy from a much stronger position, with renewables now seen as mainstream instead of alternative. In this episode, she offers some really strong insights into how we modernize the grid and speed things up. You're going to hear about Susan's career, and you'll also learn about some priorities for grid modernization, such as permitting reform and workforce development. Take a listen. Susan, it's great to have you with us on The Optimistic Outlook.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm really thrilled to be here and honored to join you today.
Hey, listen, I want to start with a little bit about you. I want you to share with our audience when you first knew that you wanted to be involved in finance.
I knew from the time I was a child that I really wanted to make a difference, and it started with my mother, who observed me also as a school teacher in my early years, and said, "Susan, you need to make a difference. Figure that out." And at first, I thought, I'll pursue a career in medicine. That will really make a difference. But then I realized with my inclinations in math and in languages and other things, I'd be better off pursuing a career in global finance, where I felt I could tackle also big international problems. So I set out in that course, even in grade school and early years of high school. And fortunately, I also got great advice from a Swiss banker who was a client of my father's. And he said, "Susan, that's great, but you really need to dedicate yourself on a path with decisions to get yourself to that goal." And so I did. I went on to Notre Dame and Georgetown and studied finance and languages, worked and lived abroad, and created that credential so that I could, once I graduated, find a career and seek a job in finance.
funny thing is, when people asked me that question when I was little, what do you want to be when you grow up? My answer was a grandmother, because my parents had said, you could be anything you want to be. And it's like, how do you choose? So, to meet someone who actually was that focused and purpose driven from a very early age, that's actually impressive. But tell me when you knew that it was going to be clean energy and finance.
Well, when I graduated from Georgetown, I had the opportunity to go into international banking with ABN AMRO, and I was on my way to become the first class of non-Dutch expats. And my boss at the time saw the emerging independent power industry and said, hey, hold on. You need to stop here and think about the opportunity to join me in starting up our first clean energy project finance group. Fortunately, I listened and said, okay, this will make a difference. I'll join him. And he assigned me to alternative energy. It wasn't even called clean or even renewable. In the early days, it was biomass, as you know. But I had the opportunity to grow and be involved with our industry just as it was at its cusp. And as we know, then wind came about in solar, and I was there from the beginning.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think back to the early days of my own career. In fact, I was a software developer. We were learning programming. Programming was being invented while we were doing it in those early days. And I look back now and I think about how different things are. I'm curious about your own perspective about how much has changed since those early days. Is the focus, the language, the sense of ambition for what can be accomplished, how has that changed over time?
There's a sea change from when I first started. Again, being called alternatives tells you how serious the obstacles were to becoming the mainstream energy source. But the naysayers were always continuing to say that, no, wind, solar, they can never be more than 1 or 2% of our energy grid. Renewable energy is too expensive and it's not reliable. So I think that what's really been exciting to see is that now we actually have renewable energy, wind and solar, and we've added storage, have achieved more than 15% of our energy supply as of last year on the grid. And as importantly, the new capacity that's coming online has been closer to 80% of the new energy being added. So we've only just begun, and at the same time, the rapid pace of course, energy and once it has to be economic. In 15 years, the cost of solar power went from $350 a megawatt hour to $35 a megawatt hour today. So that shows a 90% decrease in the cost of solar power. Now, obviously, a lot of that's been technology driven, but I also recognized early on that we have energy sources that are free, but we have high upfront costs. So it's also important to continue to drive financial innovation, bring more capital into the sector to fuel this decreasing levelized cost of energy to make it affordable as a competitive source of power across the U.S. and around the world, for that matter.
Well, solar has got to be a really good example showing how kind of new technologies entering into a market can, be expensive at first, but then drive this economic equation. What are some of the technologies you're financing today that give you the greatest hope for the future?
One is energy storage, which has been, again, we see the value of public policy where energy storage was benefited from its own standalone tax credit. But I think it's exciting to see energy storage everywhere that we finance, which is utility scale, community solar. But as importantly, Barbara, as you know, we very much are dedicated to decarbonizing behind the meter, the built environment. And we see storage everywhere because it helps with integrating with clean energy technologies to also provide resiliency, and with the exciting software that you and others will provide to allow for net metering and also managing the use of power in demand response in the built environment and integrating with the grid. So that promise and the financing models we're trying to innovate is something we're very much focused on to help accelerate that.
the really cool thing about storage capacity coming online is that a lot of people don't understand the physics, the fact that when you generate an electron of electricity, you got to use it or you lose it. And the fact that we do have storage capacity coming on means that we really can take full advantage of what we're already generating. And that's going to be a big step forward. I mean, lots of technological advancements going on, but it's not just in production or transmission of electricity. Tell us about some of your other insights.
Really, bringing on storage has given another important tool to managing the grid, not only to expand the capabilities and have more power on the grid, but as importantly, reliability. As we've seen in Texas, we've seen in other states with bigger storms, with fire, with other different challenges to the grid, it's really been exciting to see how storage and the software that goes with that is helping grid operators with the reliability issue to make sure we're keeping power on even during some of these times where you have different in weather patterns.
So yeah, from alternative energy to renewable energy, now to reliable, resilient energy. I mean, you've really seen the arc of the evolution of this grid.
And the cost of having fires, the cost of having outages, those economic costs, and even worse, sometimes the other outcomes from that, I think are incentivizing a new thinking to let us break through models and deploy more storage and some of the other opportunities we have with technology to improve the grid, which is so important.
What I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the ecosystem, the partnerships that it takes to make projects like yours successful. So here you are. I knew you first at Hannon Armstrong. You're named HASI now. You're also chairing the American Clean Power Association. And so you're building an energy ecosystem that's bringing a lot of players to the table. How important is the ecosystem? Why is it important for you to be working with others right now?
The American Clean Power Association is a perfect example of the strength of partnership and how the industry has migrated from just fragmented players, recognizing this is the time to come together because we are the energy future. Clean energy is the energy future, and it's bigger and provides enough promise that it benefits the players to come together and become a force in D.C. akin to how the American Petroleum Institute represents the oil and gas industry. So I was invited to be one of the founding members with other industry leaders of meeting in Washington saying, what should we do? We're at a different pivot point. Our growth opportunity is phenomenal. How can we bring together our voice for the right advocacy and public policy? So we formed American Clean Power. This was about 6 years ago. We started a fresh sheet, American Clean Power Association, with a bigger tent's better, let's all get aligned, because joining forces and figuring out common ground would be more powerful than being fragmented and advocating separately. So we did. So we have utilities and independent power producers and financial investors and corporate buyers and manufacturers. And the testimony to that kind of power is how ACP is helping drive the policy, the IRA that was passed, but also the rulemaking and other advocacy initiatives that we need to enable the energy transition, not only to continue, but to accelerate, which we, as we know with the growing energy demand we'll talk about, is absolutely paramount.
Susan, as you think about partnerships, are you actually partnering differently with clients these days?
We've always been client-centric, focused in our partnership. Again, we invest across utility scale, behind the meter, everything in between, and infrastructure. But what I see is also making that more valuable is how our clients' business is now also growing so fast. Their pipelines, their commitment to invest more in development in this market because of the strong public policy and long-term growth forecast. So we are definitely focusing even more so day to day on innovating ways to provide capital on a repeat basis that's scalable and driving down any costs that we can by being more efficient and some of the friction, and seeing that really take off. So we're doing long-term frameworks. In particular, this is helpful for the growth in some of the models and behind the meter where you're doing a lot of smaller transactions, but when you add them all up, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars of investment with one partner, and lets them actually scale and drive efficient and affordable products for their clients. So we see a lot more innovation, or definitely focused on how we can be innovative to help accelerate the decarbonization of some of these harder to decarbonize sectors.
This makes a world of sense to me. And we're seeking this with some important customers of ours, the idea that, hey, if we could have certainty about the bigger picture, are we going to be doing business across a whole range of projects like this? Then we can plan the manufacturing capacity and we can get all that done in a much more efficient way. We'll all move faster this way.
And just to add to that, which you've touched on, I know in your podcast, and we've talked about a bit here, is the business models are rapidly changing and require a lot more creativity when you're using not just one technology, but you're using multiple technologies and then enabling that with software to drive revenue streams that may not only be energy savings, but some reliability with storage, demand response, and different, power purchase prices for, solar, wind, or storage. But you pull that all together, and who are the companies that we can partner with? They're going to figure out how to provide that as a blended or combined product to the end user, and that we can come up with a creative financing solution that matches all that up to enable the initial investment. So it's exciting and challenging.
Well, yeah. And in fact, that's exactly where I want to go next, because, what we're seeing as Siemens is a huge demand for the electrification of things that maybe in the past were gas powered or otherwise. And so with, if we sort of look at the future and say the future is more electric and more connected, what this is driving is huge demand in data center growth, huge demand in the electrification of manufacturing processes. I'm curious what you're seeing in the demand. I mean, what I'm hearing from some of the utilities who serve us, for instance, is that they've got double and triple the demand for electricity hitting their desks, and they're not exactly sure how they're going to provide everything that's needed right now.
That's exactly what we're hearing, and it's the pace and the recognition of this growing demand is just mind-boggling. We've gone from almost 15 years with no power growth or even reduced power demand thanks to the great success of energy efficiency. We're now seeing with the success, again, of our policy of not only the IRA, but as you know, the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bill, this huge amount of growth in demand, which is just starting. I mean, those bills were only passed and that policy is just kicking off. So now you're seeing, one, AI is only 18 months old. The data centers and the amount of energy they're needing, we're just figuring out is going to be multiples. So we're seeing new manufacturing being built all over the country in all 50 states, and then also in rural areas. So I think we've just in the last 6 months, we've seen Georgia Power, we've seen PJM, we've seen other utilities looking at their resource plans that they spend a long time building and then sending into their utility commission saying, are seeing all this sudden demand growth and we're just recognizing it and going back and refiling and saying, we're going to need to quickly build and provide for more energy and also transmission with it. And it's in all of the above. We need more power. We need more clean energy. We need to build out our grid. So it's stunning how fast it's happening. And every day there's a new forecast that keeps lifting up where that's headed.
Yeah, I think people may not be aware, especially as we talk about this more connected infrastructure. And now with AI coming online, data center constructors are booming. And I talked to a constructor, it's almost a year ago now. What they said is we had worked with our utility. The utility was opening up a new nuclear power plant. And the data centers that we already have online or coming online have already consumed all of the power that new plant can produce. Where are we going to go next? And so here you are with the American Clean Power Association. We know that a lot of those, it's not only the data center constructors, but it's also the tech companies who are filling those data centers, who are very focused on ensuring that that's clean power supply coming into this huge boom. And I know that what they're all thinking about is where to turn for this. I'm kind of curious whether you're seeing opportunities that we should all be aware of. I'm assuming people come to you with good ideas about either new technologies or new approaches.
Because having this power is so fundamental to the success of the tech company's core business in developing the leading and competitive AI models, it's great to see those tech companies and really other energy users joining forces with American Clean Power and themselves presenting solutions and also a force to promote new technologies, new grid build, but also what do we have right here in front of us that will enable using even better and optimize the grid that we have today. And I know your recent podcast, you touched on all the software innovation that we need to deploy and can provide improvements. Fortunately, we've seen these technologies also accelerate, just like AI is brand new, but we have now proven technologies which will let us open up the grid capacity that we have today and optimize it to provide the short and medium term expansion of the grid we have as we talk about building new transmission. I think that's super, super exciting because that can be deployed in different parts of the country, which allows data centers to go locate where they can get new energy. And also we have a lot of curtailment and energy that's available today that would be able to be brought onto the grid more effectively and reliably by deploying technologies that are proven now, aren't that expensive, and can be deployed in a short time frame. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, but those require capital investment, and I'm thrilled that there are investors like yourself there ready to perform. But there are a couple of roadblocks. I mean, things that we are dealing with today that can hinder progress. I know there's a huge public debate about permitting. We know that there are huge concerns about where's the workforce going to come from. Let's start with permitting. I'd love to get your insights into the state of the dialogue regarding permitting for grid expansion or transmission distribution, et cetera.
It takes, on average, 6.5 years just to get through permitting to build a new transmission line. Sometimes it takes a decade or longer. We looked at last year, there were only 255 miles of new high voltage transmission lines built in the U.S. So we can just look at what's actually gotten done and realize how much of a problem it is with our permitting process. It's complicated, it's fragmented, and we need solutions to accelerate the permitting so that the transmission lines themselves could actually be built out within a few years, which is the shorter part of the equation. In fact, Barbara, I was on Capitol Hill this week with CEOs from our industry, utilities, developers, and operators. And as we visited both with senators and representatives, Democrats and Republicans, what was interesting is often the conversation started out with one of them saying, gee, we were hearing about all this energy growth, all this demand, and we're going to need more power. So we are focused and understand the urgency of building out transmission and addressing that through a permitting bill. I think we were also encouraged that we did hear the important leaders on that, Senator Manchin and Brasso, the Democrat and Republican leads for the Senate Energy Committee, suggested they are working on a bipartisan comprehensive bill. So we certainly amplified, this is urgent. Please go ahead and bring it out, and we'll look forward to to working together to get something done this time.
And I think that things like on-site power generation are going to become more and more important and more relevant. But it is key that, we have some areas of the country that have vast supplies of renewables, and being able to then transmit that energy across those big distances of the United States, that's key too. So thank you for being our voice on Capitol Hill to help make stakeholders aware of what's needed. This is the statement I keep making is that the economy can only grow as fast as our power production can grow. And so it's efforts like this that are going to enable that expansion. But another big piece of this is the workforce. I'm curious about whether, from a HASI perspective and also from your American Clean Power Association perspective, what are some of the things you're working on with respect to workforce?
Yeah, it's a great challenge, but also a great opportunity when you consider that clean power today employs what's estimated as 500 workers, but by 2030, we're going to need at least 1 million workers. So that goes back to really a dedicated effort by all parties to attract, train, and build out this workforce for these different purposes. So one example is that at American Clean Power, we just have established and rolled out the Clean Power Institute, which is dedicated to funding and developing partnerships across the country to train workers, attract workers, and as importantly, to also make sure we have the certifications and standards for safety. Our number one priority is to have our workers safe when they're on the job. But other examples I'd like to highlight, which I see with our partnerships companies, one that really touches me is Summit Ridge Energy, which is a community solar developer that we invest with, has also invested money in 548 enterprises. And it's been very successful in building the Sustainability Hub in Chicago, which will train and employ 10,000 workers in underprivileged neighborhoods right in Chicago where people live, and also then provide a direct pathway for them once they're complete their training to get jobs, whether it's with Summit Ridge or other companies that are doing community solar or other clean energy projects right there in their neighborhoods. So that's an example of a good local, urban opportunity that our companies are leading. But also when you go to rural areas, I'll take West Virginia. I was at the project site for the ribbon cutting for the Black Rock project, which was built by Clearway, who we were a 50-50 owner in that project. And the site manager was telling me the story of how he likes wind and is excited about this job because it gave him an opportunity to join this new sector versus being in a coal mine as his family had been for decades. So new jobs and a healthier job at the same time. Another example in West Virginia, again, a state that's had to deal with the energy transition. I was with the CEO of Form Energy this week in D.C., and they got funding from the DOE to actually build the first manufacturing project for a new breakthrough long-duration storage facility, and it's in West Virginia. So he's getting ready to open that facility, and as it ramps up, has the opportunity for 700 workers right there on a former steelmaking site to have a new employment opportunity. So having this job creation and training that goes with it and certification in all counties of our country in all 50 states is certainly what we need to succeed, Barbara, as you well know, but it's also great for the future of our country.
Oh, it's inspiring. A lot of people have been concerned that, various stages of technological advancement have move jobs overseas. This is actually the opportunity we have to bootstrap again, to bring new technologies right into every town and county, state across this country. And it's so cool to hear that you get that visibility as someone who's making these projects possible. Often when we talk about innovation, we're talking about innovation in the technical realm, but innovation in the business models is every bit as powerful at a moment like this. And I'm thrilled to just get some insights from you about how that's working within your business. Listen, what I love to do as I talk to guests on this podcast is get them to share with us their optimistic view for the future. And Susan, as you sit here, both from a HASI perspective as well as from the association perspective, what are you most optimistic about? What can we look forward to that you're helping create for our future?
What this is so exciting is not only the energy demand growth that we have, which is going to enable all sorts of new technologies in A&I and reshoring, but it's also not only fueling economic growth, but the conversation is getting coupled with energy security. And I'm really excited to hear about the two of them coming together, because I think it's increasingly important that we focus on that in this volatile global environment so that we have a long-term prosperous and secure energy future. And we continue to drive the energy transition, but having energy security with that has gained the attention of other forces, I think, that will help us with the even stronger tailwinds to drive this all forward.
It's exciting. I've heard a lot of people talk about the U.S. as a business destination because we've got a relative ease of access to healthcare, relative ease of access to power. We've got access to an educated workforce, and that workforce is being educated in all kinds of new things. With all those ingredients, coupled with the rule of law and a system that supports entrepreneurship, why wouldn't you keep growing in the United States? And Susan Nickey, thank you so much for the contributions you're making to that. It's been a delight to have you as a guest on our podcast.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. It's always great to be with you.
Well, hey, I hope you got as much out of that conversation as I did. I sense often that people see the task of modernizing the grid and preparing for our electric future as too daunting, or that it can't happen quickly enough, or that the solutions don't exist. But this can be done. The solutions do exist, and there's a lot of exciting work underway. So keep listening for more on this, and please send me questions, ideas, and feedback. You can leave a comment on LinkedIn or send me a message there, or email us at optimist.us@siemens.com. I also recently launched a LinkedIn newsletter, The Optimistic Outlook, and I hope you'll subscribe. Talk to you soon.
Please follow us on social media and on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you for tuning in.